I'm testing home inspection recommendations, repair estimates, and offer negotiation strategy head-to-head with ChatGPT with my own experiences. If my buyers followed ChatGPT's advice, they would be out over $8,000 in out-of-pocket expenses lost on the purchase price and also added thousands of dollars of risk. I'm Will Taylor, a licensed real estate agent in South Carolina and Georgia. Buckle up, we're going deep. First, what is artificial intelligence? When I took computer science back when I was in college, it was mostly just about pattern recognition. Now, large language models can stage vacant homes in seconds, build listing videos just from the photos, automate marketing workflows, they can generate flyers, they can review home inspections, and they can collate massive market data sets instantly. This gives consumers incredible market visibility, education, and power. But on a transaction level, nothing has really changed. Physical home tours, inspections, appraisals, repairs, offer emails, and the signing of the actual deeds still requires human connection in order to get that done. Let's break down the process of using AI to purchase a home. I'm going to start with the home inspection and work backwards to writing the offer to see the benefits and the risks of just relying on the algorithm. With current technology, you can take your home inspection, upload it into an AI tool, and ask it for recommendations on what to repair. I've tested this on a recent home inspection. I uploaded it to ChatGPT and asked for its recommended repairs. And it put everything in a nice table and assigned a priority to it. It did a pretty reasonable job, and I really don't have too many notes here, +1 for AI. So since we know that AI isn't going to give you the worst recommendations when it comes to a home inspection, who are you going to call to get the actual local estimates? When you Google contractors, you get sponsored pages, you get highly optimized websites, and then there's kind of everybody else. AI works the same way. It's trained to find the most highly optimized search result, generally from a company that is heavily invested into marketing. This may or may not be the best person for the job. You may have also heard that private equity is taking over a lot of home service businesses it's worth looking into. Let's say there is a bad toilet valve or some asphalt roof repairs that are needed. I had a couple invoices from past transactions that I used to establish the scope, and I asked ChatGPT for the estimates and for who to call. As expected, ChatGPT recommended 3 plumbers and 3 roofers. It output a table with the repair and the estimated costs. Quite frankly, it looked really good. But what was interesting to me is that the estimated cost that it gave me for these repairs was between $2,350 to $4,500. It also recommended that I greatly increase the scope of my roof repairs. In practice, the toilet valve replacement was $150 with a local handyman who didn't have a website. The roof was repaired for $672, again with a local roofer who did not have a website. If I was in the roofing business, I would like to be on ChatGPT's recommendation list yesterday. Both of these contractors are licensed, insured, they warranty their work, and both of them did not appear in ChatGPT. Now take this information of knowing that your repairs are going to cost less than half of the low end of what ChatGPT is saying, but now you're asking to negotiate 3 to 5 times that cost. It makes you, the buyer, or your agent that's performing this negotiation look like they're negotiating either in bad faith or just with really bad information. So up until this point, it's not that the AI hasn't been useful. It was really good at telling me what I should get fixed, but it was just pretty far off on my estimates. However, there is one fundamental flaw when you start to dig into the sources for the estimates. AI relies on scraping publicly available or user data. The source of this data may not be as reliable as the conclusion looks. Oftentimes, home improvement sites, blogs, or Reddit will be the cited source for the information. We had a phrase in my previous career: a database is only as good as the data that goes in. Bad data in is equal to bad data out. And from my experience, every contract that I have signed, whether it be real estate or otherwise, has not been made public. The only people that know the terms of the contract are me and the other parties. And in real estate, we rely heavily on contractors. How often do you go to a contractor website and they have a table with a list of their services and the prices? More often than not, it's just a button, click here for a consultation. The point, generally the finer points of these contracts, including the scope and the price, are not going to be available for AI to scrape. That means that these AI-generated estimates can be unreliable, and the reason why is because ChatGPT simply just doesn't have access to life off of the internet. In real estate, there's an inherent personal touch and specificity that AI just doesn't have access to. A side note, there are tons of stories that you can read about that go into some of the conflict in the AI space where AI would like to have access to private data as opposed to only public data. I really encourage you to research these on your own and leave a comment about what you think about AI data access. Now, why we are all here, let's talk about writing an offer with ChatGPT. I had a buyer that went under contract on a home, and before it was entered into the MLS, I wanted to test to see if I could out-negotiate AI. It's a basic experiment. I ask for the initial terms, and then I ask it to increase my probability of winning. You may have seen similar functions like this pop up on larger syndication sites already, where you can see write me a strong offer, a moderate, or a weak offer. I'm going to hide the address and the neighborhood details to protect the privacy of my clients. The basics. The house was listed for $529,000, and it was in a neighborhood where they build a lot of the same homes. This is a very solid data set for any person or AI to use. Here was my prompt. Can you advise me on what a good offer to purchase this address is? I'd like to minimize my costs at closing and close within 60 days. Please include all terms including due diligence length, appraisal, local norms. I will be using a VA loan. And ChatGPT's response was, the list price is already in line with current comps. Your initial offer price should be between $510,000 to $515,000. You should have a due diligence fee of $1,500 to $3,000, earnest money deposit of $5,000 to $10,000, a due diligence timeline of 10 to 14 days, close within 45 to 60 days, include a VA contingency, an appraisal contingency, and an inspection contingency. Seller pays for the closing costs, and then ChatGPT said that they can write an offer template for me. Now, I'm going to ignore the fact that ChatGPT just gave me pricing advice without giving me the South Carolina disclosure of brokerage relationships, having me sign an agency agreement, or even just being a broker. I'm sure that there's some disclosure saying that this isn't advice, but this video is already long enough. At first glance, this offer seems reasonable, and ChatGPT did tell me to ask my agent to prepare a CMA. So if you're an out-of-state or inexperienced buyer, there might not be any big red flags right here. However, from a local agent perspective, there was some pretty poor advice. First up, the due diligence fee. A due diligence fee of $1,500 to $3,000 in this neighborhood is absolutely absurd. What this means is that if my client chooses to walk away from the property during due diligence, which is their right, they would have to pay the seller $1,500 to $3,000 directly. Under 5% of my buyers ever have had this in a sales contract. Up next is the earnest money deposit of $5,000 to $10,000. In my prompt, I include that it's a VA loan and I would like to minimize my closing costs, meaning that this buyer doesn't have or doesn't want to put a lot of money out of pocket to close on this home. $5,000 is a lot of money and is at risk of loss if the buyer has to leave the contract when they do not have the right to. And additionally, this specific community has a lot of buyers that use VA loans with similar needs. So the earnest money isn't always the 1 to 2% of the purchase price that you see online. Third, and this is a nitpicky item, do you remember from earlier when I said I do not upload my contracts into an AI system? In South Carolina, due diligence is a fantastic right for the buyer and it's written into the contract. Home inspections are done during this period. And during due diligence, the buyer can leave the contract for any reason that they would like. The home inspection didn't come back great, the HOA is a financial mess, or the brand of the toilet isn't the one that they like. I've seen it. The point. Due diligence is a vastly stronger term than an inspection contingency, and there's no need for that additional contingency. You're just adding more to negotiate without any benefit. So my next prompt into ChatGPT was, what do you give the % chance of acceptance for this offer? Well, we want to know if they think this is a winning offer or there's room for improvement. The estimated probability was 45 to 60%, meaning that the buyer would most likely have to come up in price and or concede on other terms as well. When writing an offer, I describe to my clients, there are 3 options: the outright no, the let's talk, or the sure thing. And interestingly enough, ChatGPT had a pretty similar approach. In response to my prompt, ChatGPT also included a list of factors that would increase the chance of probability that the offer would get accepted, such as if there are no other offers, it was listed for more than 30 days, but if there are competing offers, things to look out for. And after this, ChatGPT said, well, here's a surefire way to increase the chance of acceptance. You can cap your closing costs at $10,000 that you're asking for. You can lower your due diligence to 10 days. And you can also offer appraisal gap coverage of $5,000. As I said before, more concessions, but the logic isn't unfounded if you think about it this way. If you want to increase your chance of winning, give the seller more of what they would want. But in this scenario, I'm a buyer's agent and my interest is making sure that my buyer gets the best deal. I then ask ChatGPT, okay, let's increase the chance of acceptance to 85%. And remember why. There are larger syndication sites that are using tools like this for buyers to say, hey, this is what you should offer if you want a strong, moderate, or weak offer. Its response was a purchase price of $525,000 $3,000, closing costs of $9,000, due diligence of 10 days, due diligence fee of $3,000, earnest money of $7,500, close within 45 days, and a $5,000 appraisal gap. So now that we know what ChatGPT thinks is a winning offer, let's go ahead and see how this deal unfolded. My buyer's initial offer was $493,000, $3,500 in earnest money, $13,000 in closing costs, a 30-day closing, a 14-day due diligence, an appraisal and VA contingency with no appraisal gap, no due diligence fee, and the buyer agent compensation paid. My advice to the buyer here was go aggressive. This offer was almost 7% off the list price, and they were asking for $13,000 in closing costs. This is well above the norm of what people have been asking for. But why did we go so aggressive? Well, the home has been on the market for 220 days. This data was available to ChatGPT. It's right on all of the big syndication sites. However, ChatGPT continued to raise the price $10,000 to $15,000 from earlier, even though it noted being listed for 30 plus days would help increase the chance of that offer being accepted. Like, it didn't consider, I have the address, it's 220 days, why would I note that as could be something? Just summarize it there. My point being is that the AI already had access to the days on market for this listing. Additionally, there were no competing offers, there haven't been a lot of showings, and there were some other extenuating circumstances. This is all data that ChatGPT would not have access to. So you may ask, well, why didn't you add it to ChatGPT and ask it to retailer your offer? Because I'm petty. Well, no. The idea here is if real estate agents were to go away and we were to rely on the AI for our information, this information is only available through a person-to-person conversation. In order for this information to be relayed to the buyer so they could then use it to negotiate against the seller, that seller would have to input this information somewhere into the internet so the AI can scrape it in real time. And just to mention again, it did ignore the 220 days that the listing had been on the market when it gave me what I should offer on the property. One other thing here, ChatGPT didn't once tell me to ask for a buyer agent compensation fee to be paid, even though it did tell me to get a CMA from my agent. On that topic, buyer agent compensation data is a lot less available to AI in 2026 than it previously was. In 2024, buyer agent compensation was removed from most of the MLSs and is no longer published with each listing. And if we're assuming that a real estate agent won't be used to make this offer, it also didn't ask me to discount the price if I wasn't going to be using a buyer agent. A buyer agent fee would have added significant out-of-pocket expenses to my buyer. So back to the deal. The sellers reviewed the offer and they submitted a counteroffer, just as planned. The terms that were finally settled on, $519,000 purchase price, earnest money of $3,500, closing costs of $13,000, a 60-day closing, a 14-day due diligence, no due diligence fee, an appraisal and a VA contingency without appraisal gap coverage, and the buyer agent compensation fee is paid by the seller. Basically, all we had to work on was price and the closing date. We were able to keep major buyer protections and have an adequate due diligence time. So how did we beat ChatGPT's 85% probability? We beat it on price by $6,000. We beat it on closing costs by $4,000. We beat it on due diligence by 4 days with no due diligence fee, by the way. That removes $3,000 of risk. We beat the earnest money by $4,000. We provided no appraisal gap coverage. That removed $5,000 of risk for my buyers, and the buyer agent compensation fee was paid. In summary, that's $8,000 plus commissions and out-of-pocket expenses saved. That's $6,000 financed, and that's $3,000 to $5,000 of risk that was removed versus ChatGPT.
Nice.
Comment below, is that what you expected? Now, to be fair, AI wasn't completely unreasonable in this. On price alone, we only beat the house by 2%, which makes sense because sales comps are publicly available and pretty easy to scrape. The majority of the wins here were in the terms that do not get published, and we mitigated a lot of risk for my buyers that could have been very costly. If price is your only focus, ask ChatGPT, you don't need me. And like I said before, ChatGPT also offered to write the offer for me, but that's for another video. When using AI as a consumer, just remember that data in is equal to data out. Real estate is done in writing, and these contracts are not available for the AI to scrape. If you're looking to buy or sell in the Low Country, my contact information is below. I'm Will Taylor, and let's equip you for success.